around
Recording
long
in
enough,
progress.
they just make you senior, right?
All right, there are so many people in the room. I don't know if we have all our Zach folks here.
That you made us
One,
waiting, so we were
Two,
like,
three. There's Vic. All right, I think we have our Zach folks. Apologies for the slightly late start, everybody. I'm going to start with the script, and then we'll update the agenda, and then we'll roll forward. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting will be conducted via remote means in accordance with applicable law. This means that members of the public body, as well as members of the public, may access this meeting via virtual means. Participants may access the meeting through the remote meeting link as posted on the meeting agenda and through the town online calendar. When required by law or allowed by the chair, persons wishing to provide public comment or otherwise participate in the meeting may do so by raising their hand or otherwise signaling their intent to speak. This meeting will be recorded. Please take care to mute your microphone unless you have been recognized by the chair. We will now confirm attendance of all members. Please respond with present if you are on this call. First of all, my name is Ted Barker Hook, and I'm the chair of the Zoning Advisory Committee. Mary Larson Marlowe.
Present.
Ron Foisey.
present.
Arnold Cohen.
Muted.
Present.
There we go. Kristen Borzamato. No. Madhu Chandrasekhar. No. Rachel Rawson. No. Sam Sater.
Present.
Beautiful. Curtis Smithson. No. I'm just updating my own attendance as we go. And Vic Prati.
Present.
Excellent. So, and Madhu was a no, right? Yes, Madhu was a no. Sam is here. Vic is here. Great. For everybody in attendance, we have an adjustment to the agenda. We will not be discussing South Street, Hayward Street tonight. As the, I don't know if applicant is the right word. The petitioner is not the right word. The party that brought the issue to Zach was unable to attend tonight. So we're going to put that discussion off for a month. John, what did we say? May 13th? What did we say?
Yep.
Looking right now. Yes, May 13th.
Okay, so for those of the public here for that discussion, I imagine we'll see you Monday, May 13th. I assume that's a Monday.
Let's take a look. Yes, it is a Monday.
Okay. I suspect that some of the room will clear out fairly quickly at this point, but you are more than welcome to stay, everybody, and be a part of our other discussions. The next thing I'd like to do is move a vote of the minutes of March 11th up to the top of the list. Zoning Advisory Committee, were you able to read the minutes? If you were, does anybody have any changes or amendments? I assume silence is acceptance. So let's have a vote of whether to, I don't know what the verb is, publish the minutes, make official the minutes. Whatever that verb is, I'll let John decide. So let's have a quick roll call vote. Mary Larson Marlowe.
I think we need a motion first. So
You're right. You're right.
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Approve. That's a good verb. Can we get a second to approve the
Second.
minutes?
Yep.
Okay, now let's have a vote. Thank you, Mary. Mary Larson Marlowe.
Yes.
Ron Foisey.
Yes.
Arnold.
Yes.
Sam.
Yes.
Vic.
Yes.
Did any other committee members join since I took attendance? No, and Ted Barker Hook is a yes. So approved, duly approved. So with South Street, Hayward Street delayed a month, Next on our agenda is discussion with the Permanent Building Committee, Dan McIntyre, regarding the Center School and Elmwood School buildings. I don't think, John, did you send any information about this out ahead of time? If you did, I missed it completely.
I did not.
Okay, so Dan, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Great. Can you fill us in on what we're chatting about? Because I think we're all, other than knowing the properties, in the dark.
Okay. So as I'm sure you're aware, the Permanent Building Committee is looking at potential uses of the Center School and Elmwood School. We had a number of public outreach meetings to figure out what the public might want to see at those sites. And there were a number of suggestions, most of them municipal uses, relocate town hall over there, Parks and Rec facilities, a community center, an integrated pre-K program to get it out of Marathon School and build another one down at either Center or Elmwood School. But one of the uses was to, it's not really a use, but one of the suggestions was to sell Center School.
Say that again, I missed that.
To sell Center School.
Okay,
And that was for a couple of reasons. One, to generate some income for the town, either through the sale of the property or more likely through a tax generation on a property that's not generating any taxes right now. But also to help stimulate the downtown revitalization as articulated in the master plan. So the municipal uses are pretty easy to understand and evaluate. A sale of the property, a little more complex. What really do we want if we were to sell it? So we had a number of meetings with the select board, we met with the planning board, Chamber of Commerce, and we came up with a mixed-use development as a potential way to generate income and spark downtown development. Many people thought that the Center School property was a very unique property being located right there. So I do have some slides I can run by you if you'd like. If I can. share
I'm
the
happy
screen.
with that. John has control of that stuff, so hopefully he can give you some control. I saw John turned off his camera. Oh, there it is.
Okay.
All set.
I think we're good to go, all right. Did everyone see that?
Yes.
All right. So what we came up with through that group think was a mixed-use development. So we developed a request for proposal to determine, what interest there might be in that property and what the value of that property might be. So the key components of the request for proposal was a mixed-use development. We looked at a number of uses, most of them small commercial, personal services, things like that. Not a big chain store or anything like that. Just kind of a small businesses, small professional offices. Another key component was to save the 1928 building. We talked a lot about residential units. We know commercial by itself may not be sustainable. So we wanted to throw in some residential units as kind of a kicker to help promote commercial growth down there. And we came up with a maximum unit of 45. And age restricted in an attempt to minimize impact to schools. And then we want to make sure at least 10% was affordable. With respect to dimensional requirements, a new building size would be no greater than existing buildings. We also only wanted to use the front 6-acre parcel. For those not familiar with the Center School property, it's actually comprised of 2 parcels, split by an Edison or Eversource corridor. So we've got a front 6-acre parcel, and behind the Eversource land is another about 5.5-acre parcel. So we thought that the back land should not be developed and keep that as open space. It's an integral part of the trail system for the town, so we wanted to keep that off the table. And we also thought it was important to have some municipal parking as part of any development center school for uses on the common as well as just additional parking to downtown. So we sent that RFP out, well advertised, and we only received 2 proposals. And of those 2 proposals, only one met the RFP requirement. So that in itself gave us some idea of the interest in this parcel to the private sector. So we're reviewing the one proposal that met the RFP requirement. And a quick summary of that was they're proposing 45 2-bedroom condos with 5 reserved as affordable. And those would be constructed in an addition off the back of the 1928 building. Part of the school, the 1950 edition and the 1980 edition would be raised to make room for this addition off the back. There'd be 5,000 square feet of commercial space on the first floor of the 1928 building. Not a lot of details provided, but most likely some sort of restaurant in there. And then they would take about 1/3 of the 6 acres and just keep that undeveloped, because they didn't see a need to develop all of it. So we did a review of that, and there are some town benefits to that. The developer offered a $100,000 purchase price. And that was based on the fact that there's a lot of cost in demolishing the building, the hazardous materials in that old building. So they offered $100,000 for the land and building. The estimated annual tax revenue, once completed, would be $375,000 a year. That was estimated by our assessors department based on the information submitted by the developer. Another benefit is the cost avoidance. We estimate approximately $2 million liability to the town for hazardous material on the site, demolition, as well as historic renovation of the 1928 building. And that is important to the Historic Commission, and I think most people in town want to see that building saved. So there's some cost avoidance in this proposal as well. And it also, it may not meet the master plan goal, but it certainly supports the master plan by developing this property. So to do this proposal would require rezoning of that area. And well, here's a plan of what it looks like. You may have seen this in media. Ash Street Town Common over on the left, the 1928 building right here. They would demolish the back of the existing building, build 45 condos here with understory parking on the first floor and some standalone parking garages to the north. And that was a picture or architectural rendering of what it would look like. The 1928 building staying the same with a new wing off the back. So they said this was going to require rezoning, and that's where I wanted to get some opinions and thoughts from the zoning advisory committee on what they think private development proposals like those. So here's the downtown area now. You can see Center School highlighted here. This is the 6-acre parcel. The development would include the 1928 building, and the new wing here. This undeveloped dogleg on the property would be what the developer would reserve as open space to complement the back 5 acres that the town would also have. This area is currently zoned residence A, which is essentially single-family homes. The downtown business district starts over on the other side of Church Street there, and over by the Masonic Hall. That's the downtown business district. There are a couple of properties. This is the VDAA building, there's One Ash, that's in the residence area, but is essentially an office building. The old Price building here is mixed use. It's got some professional offices and some residential rent as well. So our committee is kind of making the rounds to various town committees to get their input on our evaluation of this proposal. And we thought that the zoning advisory committee would be a good first stop for that, to get some thoughts on their opinions on revising or rezoning this particular property for a mixed use development. So with that said, I'll turn it over for any questions.
Okay, great, thanks. Dan, you're not hoping for a final decision from us tonight. We can make this at least a 2 or 3 meeting discussion, yeah, especially because I don't think any of us were prepped and thought through any of it yet.
Right, and that was kind of by design, I think. You know, we talked to select board, we talked to planning board, we talked to Chamber of Commerce, we had public outreach. We had thought about coming to zoning advisory, but we thought, well, why don't we leave them kind of out of it for now, so they can look at the proposal kind of fresh, without any biases on what they thought about it. So that was right or wrong decision. That's where we are, and we understand that nothing's going to happen soon. This is going to involve a number of meetings with various boards, more public outreach before this moves
Great,
forward.
great. I didn't mean my question to be accusatory at all, Dan. I hope it didn't come across that way. So sure, we'll take some questions from the committee first, and then we'll go to the public. I have one question that pops into my head right away. I'm looking at that map. I'm looking at the woods to the southeast of current center school, which you said is going to remain open space. Will that be given to the town, or is that just a pledge from the developer that will leave that?
Their proposal would feed that back to the town.
So that would be given to the town. And then when I look at the northeast corner where it kind of juts out, would that be the same idea, or would the developer hold on to that?
That didn't come up in the discussion. There's wetlands over there.
Uh-huh. Could you do me one other favor, please, Dan? On the map that we're looking at now, could you approximate the apartment part of the proposal? How far back it would go beyond the current center school?
Yeah,
Like would it go into that playground back there?
It would go back to about where the S is, the center school, right around there.
Okay. All right, so the structure's a little bit bigger than the current
It is.
moldy, rotting section of school.
And they are proposing to kind of center it behind the 1928 building. So you
Right.
can see the existing building here is relatively close to Beth Kelly's house, which is right here. They're proposing to kind of split the difference between Beth's house and the tab lots over here.
And I guess that brings oh, I'm sorry, I didn't let you finish.
No, go ahead.
That brings me to my last question, at least for now. This has been in the press, in the media, if you will. Are you hearing anything from the abutters at this point? Is there a loud outcry? Is there a quiet murmur? Is there applause?
Well, you've been doing this long enough to know there's not gonna be any flaws. But,
I
before.
wanted to
before we
leave that
sent the
option
R-
available.
Before we sent the RFP out, I did meet with each of those abutters. It's actually three of them. The Pavlov, I met with them. I met with Beth Kelly and also the Stoddard, which would be the third abutter back here. Obviously, there's concern. Any change is gonna, set up their antennas and be nervous about what that change might be. Housing was not the favorite of anyone we talked with, any of our public governments. Because just housing is just not popular right now in town, given the fact that we just spent all that money on schools.
Right.
And also the traffic implication of, 45 units there, they're concerned about that. The commercial uses, they are concerned about that with respect to privacy, noise, that type of thing. So yeah, there's definitely issues that have to be worked through with any type of flow there.
So to recap, they're concerned about residential, but they're concerned about commercial. You know what, you
Well,
reminded me
I mean,
of, go ahead.
the other options that we're reviewing here are a new kindergarten program, a
Mhm.
new hall, parks and rec facilities. Those all come with specific impacts as well. And
Right.
the abutters are concerned about that too.
When you answered my last question, you reminded me of one more I had. I thought, and maybe John, you can help with this, and then I promise committee members I'll be quiet. I thought, and I think this came up maybe when the whole Legacy Farms plan was being proposed and developed. I thought there were rules against language with age restrictions in developments, that we had to back out of that for one piece of the Legacy Farms development. Am I misremembering, or is this different in some way? Does that, John, do you know?
Yeah, Ted, that has to do with the affordable housing component of it.
Okay,
You couldn't restrict affordable housing to ages. They had to have family availability.
so in this particular proposal, I think it was 5 affordable units. Those would not be age restricted because we're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
What was that? Okay, great. I see Ron at the top. Go ahead, Ron.
Thank you, Ted. First of all, I'd like to thank Dan and the Permanent Building Committee for all the hard work that they've done. I've been to several of the public hearings, and I think that we have an opportunity to use this parcel as another anchor for our downtown in keeping with our master plan. And any kind of a change that we bring is going to bring more traffic to downtown. Nobody wants that. On the other hand, we have to breathe some real vibrant economic life into this, and having high density populations downtown will do that. So I'm in support of that. Dan, the one question that I had was, I'm a little bit puzzled by the lack of interest in the RFP, and wondered if you had received any feedback relative to, there weren't enough of this, or it was too restrictive of this, or, if we could put 60 units in there, then, we could offer the town $1 million rather than 100,000. Is there any idea that maybe a different RFP might make the numbers look a little bit better for the town?
Well, I was disappointed as well, Ron. We had done a request for interest prior to this, and we had probably 8 to 10 interested parties in it. But when we did the RFP, only 2. The other one that we had to reject did propose 60 units. And the feedback we got is the more units, the better. And we got that from not only the developers, but our own architectural team thought that the highest and best use of this property would be high density housing. But we really had to defer to the public outlets for that was not what people wanted in town. So we settled on the 45, and maybe if we went higher, we'd get more interest. But we're also, at this particular time, we're also struggling with high interest rates. There's not a whole lot of development going on. The Hopkins drug property came on the market at the exact same time, so we were competing against that. So there's a number of things going on here, but density was definitely, a higher density would bring in more suitors.
Does that answer your question, Ron?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mary?
Hi, I'm going to echo Ron's statements about, this is great progress. Over the last time I, heard about the plans and so on, I think the committee is doing a great job. And I think that overall this plan, the details of the RFP are right spot on as to what this area needs. And I mean, I would think that, yes, traffic is traffic, and that's true, but I would think that it's a little less traffic than there was for the school buses that used to be going down there all the time. So it really should be a trade-off and better than a vacant building that the town would be responsible for demolishing or upkeep or whatever the case may be. I do have a question regarding the parking for the commercial venture in the first floor of the 1928 building. Did they talk about the designation of which parking spots would be and how many there would be for that?
They didn't say a specific number, but they felt that this area along the Pavlov property line would be suitable for the restaurant because it's got the best access into that particular building. So
Yep.
be right here. They've got some handicap spots here. There was some discussion about changing the direction of travel. Have you come in this way so the cars could be kind of parked, so the headlights aren't going to be right at the Pavlov on there need to be a lot of discussion with screening there, obviously, but it would be right in here for both public and parking for commercial activity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm, obviously the numbers would have to work out in terms of the square footage of the restaurant and so on, and the parking that would need. I'm sure there's a little bit of street parking possibly available along the common that would supplement that for a restaurant or other commercial venture. So, but I really think that it's a good plan, and I hope that the public support can be recruited for it.
I don't see any other committee members' hands raised, but maybe you're just waiting for a quiet moment.
Ted, if I may.
Yes, please, Sam.
Thank you. So looking at the plan, I see the entrance and exit on Ash Street. So nowadays, whenever there's anything happening at the common, obviously, all the parking spots fill out all around, and then sometimes even even behind the school. So, I guess, was there any thought put into how some of that, like public events, might be impacted and the parking around that area? And also if some of the overflow parking from the residents could potentially take up some of that space?
We really haven't gotten to that level of detail on this mall.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything else, Sam?
Not at the moment.
Not now.
Thank you.
Any other committee members who might be waiting for a moment?
To the chair, Ted Vic here. So,
Please, Vic, go ahead.
So I understand the abettors are, it's not been yet publicized to the public comment for this, or are we waiting to be opening for the public? Just want to understand how would the residents around this property would be impacted, and would they get a chance to say on this?
Yeah.
Are you asking me that question or Dan?
Dan.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got to, we have reviewed it at a permanent building committee meeting. Not well attended, mostly aren't well attended. We would have to do a little more public advertising, do a real public outreach meeting in this before we move too much further. The select board would like us to go in front of them. That might be a good time. We're pretty well attended and advertised meeting. So it may be the select board meeting that we do that.
Okay.
That answers your question, Vic?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other committee members? Dan, I'm going to come back with one quick question. The developer right now suspects that a restaurant would be in the school. Is that the only commercial that would fit, or is there hope for other commercial, maybe on the second floor? I don't know.
Well, there's 3 floors of that 1928 building. The lower level is not really suitable for anything. That was gonna be kind of the storage lockers for the condo unit and the mechanical equipment. The second floor was gonna be the commercial, primarily a restaurant. They thought there might be enough space for some retail, but not a whole lot of details on that. It's difficult to really determine that until they get into more detail. The third floor was reserved for use by the condo owners as a community center and private gymnasium.
Oh, interesting. So it sounds like our mixed development is quite possibly one commercial site and a whole lot of housing.
It is primary residential.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Ria, I know that you put a little something out there. You had a question about parking. Did it get answered, or do you still have questions or comments?
I still have a question and a couple of comments.
Wonderful.
Think I see 98 spaces total for this project. Is that correct?
I think that's about right.
So I have a huge concern about trying to put a restaurant of 5,000 square feet here because I work with restaurants. A restaurant of this size, now it could differ depending on the type of restaurant it is, but a restaurant of 5,000 square feet would have at least 150 seats and would be needing something in the neighborhood of 110 spaces just for their business. That's for someone who is successful. You can certainly lease to people who will not be successful. but I'm going to tell you right now, this kind of site you really do need to have a draw here, because it's not anchored by other, it's not anchored by a grocery store or some other nighttime business, lifetime business. And you know, I'd much rather see this be a residential project with a community space. Whether that community space is partly used for a kindergarten or a teen drop-in center or something of that nature. Now, you are facing a problem at 45 units because you don't get public money at the small scale. Shrewsbury just went through this with one of their buildings. They were looking at 45 units or 40 units, and they weren't getting, they had the same problem. They put the RFP out and nobody showed up. And it's because of the way these things are financed and how the cash flow means that they have to be flipped to a larger company who will pay the right rate. And they have a benchmark of a minimum of like 60 to 80 units. So that's why you're not getting the love. You're getting love from Chuck because he's Hopkinton homegrown, right? And he has faith in this. But I think the restaurant here is a big problem because there's not enough parking for them and the units to be successful. And also it's just sort of, it's interior. It's not, it's hard to place that here where it's not near another commercial space. I don't know, I've been doing commercial real estate in the retail area for 38 years now. And it's one of those things where I just see projects have got to, allow for that commercial parking, especially in the suburban area like this. Now, if this were to change, then, we'd look at something, make sure that it's just, it would work. But that's my understanding.
Now, those sentiments pretty much echo what our architectural team that reviewed this did as well. Very concerned about the viability of that restaurant and limited parking.
Yeah, just keep it residential and use this as a community center. That basement space or that lower space of the 1928 building is perfect for that. I mean, certainly it would be perfect for storage for the apartment people. Well, actually, I don't know. Is this condo or apartments? I never got an answer to that.
This one is condos.
It is condos. Okay. So yeah, so condos, they definitely, they look for storage because a lot of these people are like me, that we're going to be moving to a smaller spot and we can't get rid of all our stuff in one fell swoop.
Anything else, Rhea?
No, that's it.
Is there anything else from the public? Okay. The question, Dan, that you came to us with is what would we think about rezoning, I think is what it boiled down to in the end. Yes.
Yeah, your thoughts on that and what the mechanism is to really make that happen if the town really wants to move forward or something like this.
Well, I think the answer to part two, and here's where I'm always happy John's here to correct me when I'm wrong. I think the mechanism would be, we would discuss it. If we liked the proposal and then liked the idea of rezoning, we'd recommend it to the planning board. And then if they liked it, it would go out to town meeting and then it would be a vote. I assume that would need a 2/3 vote, John?
It would depend on how the wording is written. There is a provision for simple majority on certain multifamily zoning districts, but it would.
Yeah. So let's, for discussion's sake, again, I don't really want to come to a final decision tonight, and hopefully the rest of the committee doesn't either on what we think. But for discussion's sake, for right now, if we assumed that the proposal in front of us stayed as the proposal, this would need to be rezoned downtown business. It would be kind of a little island separated by the common from the rest of it. John, what would be what would be the zoning need?
I think we'd have to develop a unique zoning district for this lot.
So an overlay?
I don't know, I think I'd just get rid of single residential A and make it something else.
John Galsich, do you have thoughts?
I guess it would depend on what the town is trying to achieve. You could definitely do it as downtown business, but then it would potentially require a special permit because it wouldn't be ground floor retail with residential on top. Could just create a whole new zoning district for this parcel. I guess it would be, we'd have to talk about the goals for what we would be looking for out of a zoning district and then go from there.
Okay. And if Chuck heeded Ria's advice and decided to leave the old building mostly community space, then we're talking about a development that's only residential. If that were the proposal, would we need to rezone for that since it's residential A? What are the restrictions?
Really a single family residence.
I'm sorry, Dan, I didn't understand that.
I think residence A is single family residential. I think
Right.
multifamily would require variance or rezoning.
I don't
that
know
make
our
sense?
zoning well enough to be able to just immediately go, well, this is what A is and this is what B is. So that's why I asked.
So through the chair,
Yes, please.
there is no zoning district in town aside from downtown business that would allow multifamily by right, but that would, downtown business would require ground floor retail.
Right, okay, so whether that becomes community space or stays commercial, this doesn't fit any zoning we have anywhere in town.
Not currently.
Okay. All right. What I'd love to do is now stew on this, but does anyone else have any other questions or comments or feedback? I like what Ria said. I think as a committee, we have to be careful. It's not our place to tell a developer what they need to do, but we certainly can think about their proposal and if we have issues, why we have issues, and give some feedback, right? So public committee, any other final thoughts on this before we think about it for a month? Going once, twice. Oh, Mary, are you putting your hand up? No, I saw a little movement up in the corner of my screen. All right, so we will put this one down. Please, Zach, give it some thoughts. I don't know if it'll show back up in the Independent and Hop News and our other sources, but if you haven't read the article in the Independent or Hop News or both, wherever it showed up, committee members, please go back and do that. I didn't hear anything in what Dan said that contradicts what I read in the paper, but it might be helpful to go back and check that out. Dan, thank you very much. And
All right,
thank you
well,
for
thank
the
you very
work.
much.
Thank you for the work your committee does.
Thank you.
Okay. It is 5 minutes to 8, I think. All right. I wonder, I don't mean to put you on the spot, Ron, but when we had our last meeting, you brought up wanting to discuss ADUs. And I wonder if you might expand a little bit on why you brought it up and what your goals are. And then we could spin that to the way John and I entered it in the agenda, which is comparing two different solutions to at least what I understood your reason being.
Okay. John, if you could share that portion of the zoning bylaws is 210-126. And just to start out, I think we have a terrific ADU zoning guideline in place right now. It has all the right language to do what we want to do. It requires a special permit. The goal is maintaining the residential character of the neighborhood. All those things I think are terrific. The problem that I'm hoping that we might consider addressing is the issue of the cost of housing has gotten so far out of control that it's not just affordability, it's attainability. And it's just very difficult. And so this is kind of where I get into, I think Rhea brought it up at my station in life. I want to stay in my home as long as I possibly can. Okay. But let's say 5, 10, 15 years from now, it's too much for me to manage. But one of my kids said, you know, if we have this accessory dwelling unit added onto your house, you and mom can move into that. And we'll move our family into the big house and allow them to get back to Hopkinton, which is the place that they love more than any place else in the country. But they can't get anything here. But we could accommodate it, and that would take care of our need, which is, you know, we want to stay where we are. We want age in place, but it's just not there. So the only thing that I want to look at is section G, area limitation. Such accessory unit shall be limited to a maximum of 800 square feet in floor area. Okay. And 800 square feet, okay, if you're a single person just coming out of college and you get your first apartment, you can live there. But for my wife and I to move into that from where we are, it just seems to be too restrictive in terms of the design and really the character of what Hopkinton has become in terms of size of housing. So the only thing that I would recommend that we take a look at is expanding that square footage to 1,200 square feet, to give an architect an opportunity to put something together in a square footage that an aging couple could age in place, but in a different part of the house, not there. And that's the other thing I like about the ADU is it has to be attached to the main property. So it's, you know, it has a separate entrance and exit and all that kind of stuff, but it's attached. So it feels like we've done a lot of the right things. But as we've gotten older and accumulate a lot of stuff, 800 square feet is just not enough to do anything with. And that's why we'd like to just consider that upgrade. One of the things that I'm working on is trying to find other communities that have successful ADUs and what their square footage is. I haven't been successful at that, but that's part of my research in bringing this forward. But that in a nutshell, increase the size from 800 to 1,200. I think it will really enhance Hopkinton's ability to have a little bit more attainable housing to let more people get into town.
To let more people get into town, the families, like in your example, the kids
Yes.
move back when you say
Well,
more people get into town.
Right. That's all part of the existing language.
Right.
You can only do that if the person is related to the primary homeowner. And
Right.
I don't see any reason to change that.
Right. I had another thought in my head and it completely went away.
That happens to me a lot.
All right, I have thoughts, but I'm gonna sit on them for a moment. Does anyone want to share before we do the way it's phrased on the agenda versus revising garden apartments? Does anyone have initial thoughts on Ron's presentation?
Yeah, Mr. Chair
Or Ted?
or Ted.
Ted is
Okay.
fine.
So with these in-law kind of apartments, as I understand it, you know, especially if it's limited to a relative. So, you know, somebody might be living in a house and they'd like to have their parents come in and this in-law apartment and maybe do an addition to the house. But what happens when they sell it? Is it, you know, are they going to be able to find a buyer who's also going to want to have a relative live with them, or you know, does it restrict your ability to sell, or you know, I'm just wondering about that.
Ron, do you
Not
wanna-
everybody is buying a house that's gonna have their, you know, their parents or in-laws living with them. Probably most people don't, you know, so just wonder what
Yeah,
Ron
so
thought
in the
about that is.
In the existing language, section C, additional living units shall at the discretion of the Board of Appeals accommodate up to a maximum of 3 persons, provided that the owner of record of the structure is resident of the structure, which includes the accessory dwelling unit. And then the section K, occupancy permit, addresses all of those issues as to what happens when there's a change in that situation. It's all spelled out in the language already.
Okay, how does it spell it out?
I was just looking at it myself, trying to find a key line, but if you've got it right there, Ron.
Well, it's the initial occupancy permit shall remain in force for a period of 2 years from the date of issue, provided that ownership of the premises is not changed. Thereafter, permits may be issued by the Director of Municipal Inspections for succeeding 2-year periods, provided that the structure and the use continue to comply with the relevant provisions. So occupancy permits shall not be transferable upon change in ownership or change in occupancy.
Usually these in-law apartments, don't they have like a separate kitchen?
Oh, yeah. A separate entrance, separate access. It is a separate dwelling unit.
I think, did we eliminate that there had to be access from the main house into it? Or is that
Yes,
still there?
we did eliminate that.
Right, I
Um,
thought,
Yeah, John, the wording that you had shown earlier, is that based on the newly as in 3 years ago, past changes?
Correct.
Okay, good. So yeah, so we eliminated the direct relationship of the primary dwelling to the occupants of the ADU. And at the time, I'm sorry, I kind of cut the line in terms of whose hand was raised.
that's okay. I think we can all get along.
Okay. At the time, we had envisioned that we would make a series of different changes to the ADU and or some of these other bylaws to potentially make them more accommodating to some better housing. But Arthur brings up Arnold.
Arnold.
I'm sorry.
I don't know, right?
I saw
Yeah.
Arthur was another name on here, so.
I don't know how many times people have called me Arthur, but I don't know why.
Sorry. I'm so sorry. Arnold brings up some really good points, and that I think we need to be able to address those issues that people might have. So some of the things that came up at the time that we passed some of the other changes is what happens when somebody sells it, and so on. And obviously it can be rented out to somebody who is not related, so these are not going to always be the situation of family relationships, but the zoning enforcement officers in town are not necessarily going in and, checking what people are living there all the time and relationships and so on. But it can be written in to have some control over, the number of people that live there and so on. So I think we need to be sensitive to the concerns that people have, and perhaps even put a restriction about Airbnbs if that's, a concern that we find with the public. But yeah, I certainly support making these more realistic for living units. So it could also be, instead of restricting it by square footage, it's a square footage comparison to the primary dwelling.
A percentage of
A
square footage.
percentage or yeah, something like that. So that's another possibility. Okay.
I'm going to go to the other two hands. Mary, I remember our discussions on this last time, but I only kind of remember them. I think a lot of what we talked about in 2021, or maybe it was 2020 for 2021 town meeting, but was a shifting understanding of what family is. And then we ran into trouble, you know, I'm missing a legal term I was trying to find, but we ran into trouble. If there's a couple that's clearly devoted to each other, but they choose not to marry, but they've been living with each other for 10 years, that's a family in everybody's book, but they're not related in any way. But the wording that I see under L, the only non-family, we don't define what a family is, but it says a caregiver or service provider or an additional family only if a member of the additional family is related to the owner of the premises is still the wording I'm looking at. And that's after the 2021 update. So I think what is written was trying to hew to the intent of, well, Arnold, you are, I'm sorry, Ron, you are plenty healthy. You are healthy and young, regardless of what your birth certificate says. But I think part of the idea was if your folks are getting more infirm and need help, you can put help in there, or you, the family in the big house, are helping out. I think the language still, at least the feel of the language is it's never supposed to be an apartment for extra income. Would you agree, Mary?
No, I think that the way it is worded, it can be loosely interpreted. And that we took out all the defining factors about family, what family is defined as, and it can now be a rental property, but we didn't specifically say it could be a rental property. Ria was on the board at that time too.
Are you still here, Ria? Oh, she is. Okay.
I
Maybe we'll
am.
get Ria. Great. Hold on, Ria. I'm coming to you then.
Okay.
So the way we defined it, it was an ability to, without expressly stating it, it would be available for rental to anyone, essentially. Yeah, because
I
we
just
took
don't
out the
see
family
that in the
definition.
language.
No, it doesn't expressly state that, but in reality, that's,
Was
you
there a
know,
wink wink to that reality? Is that what?
no, it's realizing that the zoning enforcement does not, you know, document exactly who the people are who live in these places,
Right.
in any of our homes. Let's face it. So,
Ria, can you help us with institutional memory? Do you have other things to add from those meetings?
Well, I do remember that I pointed out that my partner and I were not married, and his son came to live with us, and he was in the portion of my house which is a legal ADU, because that's how I had it permitted back when I did my expansion when I first got here. And I think that the language that was changed was to allow for a caregiver, not necessarily a family member, to take care of somebody in the house, or for a young adult to live in the house, you know, in a separate area, or an elderly person to live in the separate area. But the fact of the matter is I think we all came to the conclusion is, how is this going to be enforced unless there was a problem?
mhm.
That was my memory, is that it was
Yeah.
about enforcement. You know, unless you have a problem, if you know someone is, you know, renting out a portion of their house in Airbnb, and the people are partying and, you know, doing whatever, and that's upsetting the neighborhood, you know, then you'd have a reason to call someone to investigate, right? But otherwise,
Right.
no. You know, by the
Okay.
way, I do a lot of Airbnbs. I do a lot of VRBOs. I mean, I'm constantly going visiting places, and you know, there's some heavy duty lease rules that, you know, you sign up for when you do that. And it's just, you know, it's like, if anybody is being obnoxious in a neighborhood, you're going to call the police, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Sam, thank you for being patient. What are your thoughts?
Oh, no problem. I'll be brief anyway. I was just going to share my thoughts really, and had one small question. So I love the spirit of this ADU. I happen to have my wife sitting next to me. We both thought, being that we're not familiar with it, we thought this sounded like a great idea, Ron. So, but immediately my mind also went to enforcement and how do you make sure this doesn't become a rental property for strangers. And so I guess my only question I have would be, I have an Airbnb down the Cape, and I know that every year I have to get a permit and I have to get it inspected whenever they decide they wanted it inspected. Wouldn't that allow for some enforcement, I guess, if the town has that capabilities? I don't know if we do. Like I can't see zoning enforcement, obviously, but to officially be able to rent and generate income from a property, you have to get a permit and get an inspection.
John, do we have that language in our bylaws somewhere about renting a property? Or is that a state thing that's just overarching?
No, there's nothing in the bylaw that would require any kind of like license or permit or anything to rent a property. I don't know of anything at the state level. I know we talked about in Zach, and it came up at town meeting last year, the short-term rentals and how do we regulate them. And the best option we could come up with was a licensing process versus a zoning process, because they were so hard to enforce zoning wise. So I would think the same type of rental question would have the same answer. It's going to be really difficult to enforce zoning wise.
Right. Vic, was your hand up earlier? Did you take it back, or was I seeing things?
No, I had my hand up earlier. I was more talking on the rental side, but looks like Mary and I already covered it. And my questions were on that because it's hard to enforce is one. Second is that what I felt is that, you know, I wanted a dwelling for my parents to come, but my parents decided not to come. I invested something out there.
Yeah.
So I would always look at an option. How do I rent it out? So,
so those who have been around might remember my thoughts. I'm really worried about enforcement as well. And I think, yes, we have inspectors that can do that. Do they want to do that? Will they do that? I'm really doubtful. In a meeting we had years ago, this is not your language, Ron. I'm not ascribing this to you. In a meeting we had years ago, a ZAC member said something like, it's pretty close to this, we need to allow bigger units so that our parents can live with dignity. And it struck me as so profoundly offensive. 800 square feet might not be all that big. The house I'm living in is 1,000 square feet before we put our family room addition on. It's only an 1,000-foot house, and we had 2 kids and 2 adults. And I feel like 1,000 feet was plenty for a family of 4 to live with dignity. And again, those aren't your words, Ron. I'm not ascribing that to you. My mother-in-law lives in the senior housing over by the senior center, and each of those units is roughly 400 square feet. And plenty of them are filled with an elderly couple sharing 400 square feet. And I've never sensed that my mother-in-law feels like dignity is being denied her because of the square footage. To me, the spirit of the accessory dwelling unit is not to build a second house. A 1,200-foot ADU is bigger than my whole house. And to me, that goes beyond what the purpose of an ADU is supposed to be. And so I really hesitate, I really resist expanding those numbers, particularly when we are, I think all of us, somewhat worried about enforcement. And the larger we allow an ADU to be, the better chance it ceases to fulfill what we think the purpose of the ADU is and simply becomes a rental property. For my own point of view, if I was to consider getting behind making it bigger, I would want to talk about proportionality more than just regular square feet. Because I also think if we just do square feet, that can really change the feel of a property. If, for example, now I live on a teeny tiny lot, but there are other lots around me that have roughly the same size house, and they could double the size of their house with a 1,200-foot ADU. But it would look bizarre. It would really look bizarre in our neighborhood because that's not the feel of the neighborhood. If, on the other hand, you had a 5,000 square foot house and you added 1,200 feet, that might fit. And so if I were to consider something, I'd be more likely wanting to talk about some sort of proportional measurement of the size of an ADU. So those are my thoughts, but I'm not ready because of all of those reasons. I thought it would be worth exploring what John has thrown out a couple times, which is another way to deal with allowing more affordable and or attainable housing is to look again at our garden apartment bylaw, which right now is pretty much inoperable because of a change that was made in 2018. I wonder, so I wrote down some notes for garden apartments, but I wonder if it might be better if, John, you feel like you can do it. Can you talk about how garden apartments, if we addressed under approval criteria number 7, how maybe that might satisfy some of the very understandable hopes of Ron's and others?
Yeah, I'm just pulling that up now.
Okay. The silence scared me. Suddenly I thought I was offline,
Right.
and all of that went out to nobody.
Everyone see my screen?
Yes.
So garden apartments,
Is there a chance, John, you could make it a little bit bigger? I'm having trouble reading the words.
yeah, I don't
If
know.
you can't, you can't. I can follow along on my own, but I don't know if everyone has bylaws in front of them. If you can't, you can't.
Did that do anything?
I think that's the same size it was a second ago,
Yeah.
but that's all right. Go ahead.
All right. So garden apartments are a provision in the zoning that allows for units in a certain development, essentially like a condominium development. I believe Davenport was developed on the garden apartments. Preserve and Maspinock Woods were under garden apartments, and so it allows for certain provisions to do. And I'm not necessarily prepared to speak about all of the provisions, but
That's
I do.
okay.
Yeah, some of the things are, minimum of 800 square feet for 2-bedroom units and 600 square feet for 1-bedroom units. They're limited to 2.5 stories. Can only have 12 units at the most, and then they have to include affordable housing, and that's the thing that is limiting them now. Because let me find what section it is. Yeah, I think you referenced it before. Decision criteria for concept plan special permit. The approval criteria is this number 7, and the planning board has to make a finding that the town of Hopkinton has not met its statutory goal to provide 10% of the housing stock as affordable. So what that means is if we are below the 10% and therefore open to Chapter 40Bs, this could be utilized by developers through a town approved process, right? To increase the housing. And I guess with the hope being that if we're allowing garden apartments, we would get to the 10% faster under a way that the town has already established. So until we get below 10%, garden apartments and village housing and residential districts are two bylaws that are essentially paused. And so all of these types of developments, which could be useful in Hopkinton, are effectively not applicable. And so there's been discussion at the planning board level and at ZAC level of, do we look at these, revise them to remove the affordable component, or not to remove the affordable component, but to remove the affordable 10% limit in order to approve and allow for these types of things, and then rework it to be a development that Hopkinton residents are looking for more of in the future.
Right. Yeah, and I think that criteria number 7 is, if we think that this is something that addresses some of Ron's hopes, approval criteria number 7 is one of the first things we'd have to reconsider, because this is an impossibility until that. Ron, were you able to look at the description of the garden apartments coming in?
I did not.
Okay, so then I won't put you on the spot to say, would this fulfill some of what you were hoping? I mean, it's not going to fulfill sharing a house with your kids. I get that. But as far as being an option for a more attainable housing and stay in Hopkinton, so I'm not going to put you on the spot, Ron, unless you have a thought. Really quick.
No, I think that garden apartments are a great way to get more attainable housing here. The problem is, most of them, the price points have gotten so crazy when you're doing construction of any kind that I don't know what the right size is.
Right.
It just seems like all of the new developments in Hopkinton are getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yep.
And it just, when you talk about proportionality, it's, my neighborhood isn't proportionate from one end of Chamberlain Street to the other end of Chamberlain Street. It's
right.
Just because that's how it develops.
Especially that newest end of Chamberlain Street.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, let me ask this. Do ZAC members feel like you can discuss garden apartments, or would you rather have a month to look over it? I might highlight a couple of things that I saw, but I don't want to have a discussion if people don't feel prepared. Mary, I see your hand again.
Yeah, and that's just commenting on garden apartments. I personally think that we should take out the provision 7 there to allow for garden apartments, but I think we'll just run into the overall dislike of multi-unit developments in town, because people just think of, more children in the school systems. And as Ron was saying, it really may not address the issue for elderly people trying to stay in town, so for a variety of different reasons. But I just also wanted to offer up that, I've gone through my notes while we've been talking about my notes from our last round of discussions on this 3 years ago. I forwarded one chart that just kind of just breaks down all the different bylaws that we have for multi-unit housing and compares them a little bit. So that's just an easy thing for people to look at to get oriented about the different bylaws that we have.
You forwarded to committee members for us to look at before next meeting.
Everybody. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And that's, that is simply to help, before you delve into each of the bylaws in detail. It's a good overview. And yeah, that's about it.
So one or two thoughts I have, and then I think it might be best for us to then say, okay, this is our next discussion. Please go do some reading. I think I remember a public forum where an in-town developer said that maybe we should open these up again and allow garden apartments again. And I think our response was, because it was pretty close to when criteria 7 was approved, we said, no, we just dealt with that. We're not going to take that up again. I would be interested if we want to explore the idea of removing criteria 7 and asking some of our local real estate developers to join us to hear what they think. I also think very much that, yes, the town is terrified, and with some good reason, of more residential expansion in town. And I think that's certainly something we'd have to keep in mind. One or two of the components that I saw that I thought were interesting to our discussion is one of them was, in fact, what's it under? Requirements number 4. I don't know if that's on the screen or not. Garden apartments may contain 1 or 2 bedrooms, which right away, I mean, I don't know how many bedrooms are up on the penthouse, the Trump Tower, but I would think that a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment makes it not all that grand an apartment. It still is not the same, I understand, as an ADU, but it might make it so they're not crazy expensive. 1 bedroom apartments shall contain a minimum of 600 square feet. I don't know if imposing maximums would help or make it utterly unpalatable to a developer, but it might be a way of trying to limit the grandiosity of apartments in town with the goal of more attainable housing. The other thing that I saw that really caught my eye, and I am not a developer and it's just caught my eye, is requirement number 1, which is on the screen right now. Anyone wishing to build garden apartments may do so only on a site containing an area of not less than 10 acres of usable land. So I don't know what 10 acres is. I can't just picture it. So before this meeting, I Googled, what does 10 acres look like? And it gave a bunch of different examples, like real life examples of 10 acres. The one that was most helpful to me, so I'll share it with you, is go to Midtown Manhattan. And if you go 6th Avenue to 7th Avenue, and then 2 blocks by streets, that is 10 acres. And it struck me that that's a pretty big lot. And maybe allowing garden apartments on smaller lots might make building 1 or 2 smaller apartment dwellings appealing. And then maybe we have a chance, if we remove criteria number 7, for more small, not massive development type housing options. I have no idea if I'm on the right track or barking up the wrong tree. But those were the things that jumped out to me when I looked at garden apartments. Does anyone have any other thoughts or anything before we table this till the next meeting?
Didn't Dan just mention that the center school parcel is about 11 acres? So that's.
Oh, did he? I missed that. But that would be the full parcel, right?
Yeah,
6 acres
the
is the
front
front
and the back. But I'm just saying in terms of square footage,
Right.
you know,
So what that would mean roughly is the front part of center school, with which I imagine all of us are at least somewhat familiar, you'd have to almost double that before it's available for garden apartment development.
it appears so.
Seems to me, if you could get that front, I mean, ignore that it's center school and we have other plans, just looking at the lot. If you can get that size lot and want to build a handful of or smaller and build a handful of apartments, there may be some appeal there. That might also not terrify the town about massive growth at a 10 acre. Again, when I looked at that Manhattan picture, it's essentially half of Central Park South, and then you go south 2 blocks. There's a whole lot of building going on in that area. So anyway, those were my thoughts. Oh, there's a hand. Yes, Ria, thank you.
Hey,
I'm glad you're here, Ria. Ria,
thank
our
you.
term is coming to an end and we're going to need to restock. Just throwing that out there.
I appreciate that, Ted. I really, tonight's agenda caught me and I said, you know, I got to weigh in on some of these things. I think I can help. I think you're on the right track when you talk about maybe adjusting that 10 acres, that minimum of 10 acres. I mean, I don't know where that came from, except for the fact that perhaps way back when big swaths of this town did not have sewer or water, that may have been, sort of a benchmark to manage a project like that. But that's like crazy. I
I'm
mean,
glad you're affirming that for me. I didn't know if I was nuts on that.
oh yeah, no, because you know what, in every growing town, you want to have different varieties of housing. You don't want to have it all look like the apartment complex, which I don't know what it's called today, but on Lumber Street, you don't want to have all our housing looking like that. You want to have, housing that is, a bunch of different kinds of housing. And it's a lot easier to grow as a town if you've got smaller tracts that are developed this way than if you put all your eggs in one basket of these big apartment complexes. It just, we're still trying to get a breath of air of all the new families that have come in here. I think it's just been the type of housing that was approved all of a sudden. You know what I mean? It just it just slammed us. And that Elmwood School, I remember coming here in 2004, 20 years ago, and looking at the building and going, God, this is a sick building. Why do they still have the school? It's 20 years later. We're trying to attack that because we were attacking the other schools. But it's going to be tough for me to live here on a fixed income in a couple of years.
Yeah.
No question about it. The taxes are too high for my house. So I don't know what the next step is, but I think you are on the right track on maybe loosening that. And maybe John has some history on that. I have no idea. I mean, I just never looked at the garden apartment bylaw before. That's all. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Rhea. I'm so happy you're back with us, Rhea. It feels right.
As long as I don't have to be here every month, okay?
Anything else on this issue for now? And then I don't know if this ought to be part of the public discussion. Ron, I just want to make sure you feel, certainly from me, heard and not attacked. I don't want, good. Thank you for the thumbs up. Good. Okay, so this will be on the agenda to continue our discussion. Please, if you would, take a look at the garden apartment bylaws. By the way, John, I just want to make sure I read this correctly. Right after the garden apartment comes, oh, I'm on the wrong page now, comes village housing. But village housing is only affordable housing. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, I believe it's yeah, I haven't looked at this in a while because
Okay.
it's
I
also not
think that's
applicable.
true because at first,
So yeah, I'm not ready to really discuss
Okay,
the
that's
details of
fine.
it, but yeah, I don't think the village housing has actually ever been used in Hopkinton.
some of the kind of the preamble material is word for word the same as garden apartments. So I didn't understand the difference. And then I thought I came across that,
It is all affordable housing.
right. So that's not necessarily part of the discussion we're having right now. So I think we can limit to garden apartments for this chat. So please take a look at that, and hopefully we all come armed with more thoughts and opinions there. We have one last agenda item, and Rhea, I'm very happy you're still here for this, although I understand you're not on the design review board anymore. But you were for a while, and I think
14 years.
I hear your voice from maybe my first year on Zach regarding this. I don't know, John, if you can help me here, because the truth is I was only able to spend a little bit of time with the design review section of the bylaws, but it's really not a very long bylaw. I think, well, Rhea, I'm going to give it to you in a moment if you're willing to take, reflect on your time with DRB. But my memory is the concern was DRB which is a committee that, unlike ours, has specific requirements to be on it, specific expertise to be on that committee. And yet, when they made recommendations, they were only recommendations, that there was no teeth of any kind. It was just whether the planning board agreed or not. And my memory is often the design review board felt unheard or marginalized by the planning board at the time. So John, I'm sorry. So Gary Trendle and I talked about this a couple times over the last couple of years, and whether it might be helpful to find a way to give the design review board a little bit more muscle. I don't know the best way to do that, but maybe if you're willing, Ria, can you give us some experience you had from your years on the design review board, and
Yeah,
what
sure.
felt like it was working and what felt like it wasn't for you guys?
Well, sure. You've talked about a bunch of different things. The first thing being the qualifications to be on the board. You had to be in landscaping, or you had to be an architect, or and then there was a couple of people at large. Design review board is only used for commercial projects. Basically, any project that is being used for income. Let's just call it that. It's not used for residential housing at all. So the purview is very specific. What I discovered is that many of the people that were on the board, didn't have any kind of experience of just being in the commercial world on a regular basis. So that was one defect, because I don't think there's a lot of people who can volunteer to do this stuff. But then on the other side of your comment, Ted, is that yes, there were occasions where we would make recommendations, and the planning board didn't really look at our recommendations. Now, this wasn't all the time, but there was certainly certain times that, there was an issue where we felt that, why are we even here? We're spending our time reviewing stuff, making recommendations to the best of our ability, and then it wasn't being utilized. Now, the problem is that design review board is a subjective opinion. It is not a legal, there's no legal benchmark for it. So that's where it gets kind of muddy. And John, you can support that statement, I think, because you told me. That's what the problem is. And I can see why we have design review, but I almost feel like design review should be a sub of the planning board, so that there's more continuity there instead of two separate boards, if you will. Because I think in other towns, if the design review board is a subset of the planning board, then it is more direct communication, you actually are part of the conversation when you're reviewing a site out there. So hope I answered your question, Ted.
I think so. I wonder, I think, John, you've also had some chats with folks regarding this stuff. Can you give any thoughts from what you've seen or heard?
Mostly just with the design review board members, similar in nature to the other comments that we've heard, but it's always confusion when we're doing sign permits, which is kind of the main thing that they do, or I shouldn't say the main thing, but the more common approval, let's call it approval, that they do. And it's really just a recommendation of the zoning enforcement official. So they, a lot of the stuff that they do is received by the applicants and addressed, but there's no obligation by the applicants to address those comments because it's just a recommendation. So there's a little feeling of, as Ria said, why are we doing this if we don't have any authority? So that's what I've heard.
Okay. So I've got a couple questions again, Ria, if, I don't know if you signed up for all of this tonight, but I find having you here really helpful. I'm, again, skimming quickly through the design review section. Number one, I don't see any language, but I could be missing it because I'm skimming, that says it's only for commercial properties. Maybe it turned into that, but is there
So
language
to Ria's
that actually
point,
says that?
to Ria's point, the design review board has two charges: sign permits to review signs, which are usually going to be just on commercial properties, and to review site plans. Residential uses are exempt from site plan requirements.
Oh, okay, okay.
So it would be
So you
anything
don't
that
need
has to
to
go through
write
site
that.
plan.
Okay. My second question is, and maybe I'm misreading. As I read about the design review board, it sounds like, very much like Zach, it absolutely is a subset of the planning board. And I wonder, I mean, after all, number one is the chairman of the planning board, or his or her, by the way, we might ought to have slash there in the language for that. But chairman of the planning board, his or her designee. I mean, right away, that indicates to me it's meant to be a subgroup of the planning board, not a separate entity. But Ria, if I heard you correctly, you said it certainly felt like a completely separate entity.
Yeah, it did feel that way. It felt like our meetings and recommendations, they were written up, but then we weren't part of the planning board hearing, so we weren't there to maybe emphasize that these were the reasons for making these recommendations. You
Mhm.
know, I don't know. I've been now off of that for 2 years.
Okay.
So it to me, it just felt as though it was a nice thing to be able to do. But again, if you don't have people who are really knowledgeable about, site plans and signage and commercial businesses, you get a bunch of people saying, well, I want gold lettering. You know what I mean? It's like, and it may or may not work for that business in that particular area or whatever, but certainly chatting about it and making sure that it does fit into the grand scheme of things is important. It's just that it's subjective. It is
Right,
not,
right. Sure.
it is not like a state by, law that show, there's some benchmark. There's nothing. It's just, does this fit within the style and the character of the town?
John, in your time with us in town and working with the planning board, do you remember, and those of you who are currently on or recently were on the planning board, do you remember times where a commercial development came up and part of the planning board meeting was, what does design review board recommend? Or is that not? So Mary, was that a regular part of the discussion?
Yes, it was a
Yeah.
regular, it was like on the agenda, and but it was understood, and it depends on the chair how much they emphasize it. But it was understood that design review board, it was I guess some of the people, some of the chairs and some of the other planning board members would say, we take the design review board recommendations to be pretty important.
Mhm.
And but it was still understood that there were recommendations, there weren't requirements.
Mhm.
Because that's the way it's worded in our bylaws,
Right.
So, they would, sometimes a developer or whomever would, kind of say, well, this part doesn't really work. I think the signage was taken more seriously than the design of the building elements and things like that. But a lot of developers would generally bend to the wishes, and, just accommodate things. But there's at least one situation that I know of, and I'm sure it's happened more, but in which a lot of work went into the design and review by the planning board after the design review board, but the design review board, you know, about the signage and placement of signage. And then, through a series of, changes to the design, of a particular location, they went through the zoning zoning board of appeals, and zoning board of appeals couldn't care less. Basically, I mean, again, it was the members on the zoning board of appeals at that time. Of course, it varies based on members, but yeah, they didn't care that planning board had documented all of these things that they were going to change and were going to do. And a lot was based on design review board, and there were reasons for it. And zoning board of appeals said, doesn't really matter to us. And, you know, just basically gave them the green light to make any changes they wanted to the design. And, you know, I was involved in that one, and I, you know, commented, and I said, I was on planning board when this was approved, or, you know, I can't remember exactly details, but yeah, and I said, this was not the intent. And then they just went to nope, this is what the bylaws say. And no, you know, it doesn't matter. Doesn't
Yeah,
matter, negotiated at the time. So yeah, that was really eye-opening for me. I gotta say that.
John, I'm going to ask you in a moment if we were to consider if the group liked the idea of giving DRB a little bit more muscle. I'm going to ask you in a moment what might be some things we could look at. But do you have any other reflections, John, from your planning board meetings in recent years with regard to this, or planning board ZBA relationship?
No additional thoughts at this time.
Okay. All right.
Pretty well covered.
Then, anyone else in the group have thoughts? I'm about to ask John where we might look to strengthen design review board, but before, anyone else? No. All right, John. So I don't know what they do in Westboro or any other town you might know more about than we do. What are your thoughts? What are some ways that we might consider if we chose to try to strengthen that board?
So there's, excuse me, there's two ways that you could affect the DRB's process, right? It's through the sign review process and through the site plan process. I'm not going to speak towards what Westboro does because it's a little different, so things don't match up equally. But I would say, if you were to look at the sign permitting process, you could create a new permit that was issued by the design review board that set criteria for what signs should include, and design guidelines or design requirements or standards. So I think they'd have to happen at once, right? You'd have to develop the standards, and then you could institute a sign permit so that you knew that the design review board was going to adhere to those standards in making those decisions, and it wasn't completely subjective. The second part would be basically the same thing without a permit issued, but having guidelines for site plans and having design review board review those site plan applications according to those standards or guidelines. This could be for there could be standards and guidelines for different areas of town. So site plans within certain zoning districts could have certain guidelines, and site plans within other districts would have different guidelines, or, you know, several different guidelines, some being similar, some being different. But I think for both the site plan and design review and sign permits, you would need to establish standards first and really understand what you'd be wanting the design review board to look at in order to have that authority. If you just give them authority, it could turn into a subjective argument at every time. I don't think that would happen with this committee, because they're all knowledgeable and reasonable. But, you know, that's not a guarantee moving forward. So you want to have these regulations kind of set in stone what their role would be and what they're basing their decisions on. So you'd want to have a set of standards or guidelines for both site plan and signs. And then the standards for site plan would probably have to be different than the standards that are currently in zoning for planning board, because planning board is the arbiter of those standards. So it would have to be more landscaping facade, color, material type standards for developments.
So I'm looking through the table of contents. If I'm assigning myself and hopefully some others come along with me, more homework, are you suggesting that we need to study Article 27 signs, or would the signage stuff be captured in site plan review, which is Article 20?
No, because people get new signs without going through site plan review. Somebody buys a building.
Okay,
Yeah, a new company buys a building and wants to install new signage. They don't have to go through site plan approval, but they do need a sign
okay.
building permit.
So for those taking notes at home, the homework would be Article 20, XX, site plan review. Then probably certainly design review, where we have the design review board stuff there. And that's 21. And then signs is 27, would need to be looked at. And then hopefully we can pick that up next time. Ria, I have one more question for you.
Okay.
Because I meant only to praise the design review board with the requirements of who can serve, but you saw it as a little bit of a weakness, kind of. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, I think that the standard of a commercial building is quite different and look and feel and everything like that than a residential house. And people seem to want to put a lot of these, some of the members wanted to put the commercial buildings into the scope of what a house would be
Okay.
like. And I just disagreed, because I said, look at you, if you want to put a business in a business building, you got to make sure it's going to be successful.
Right.
And there are elements that make it successful. So that's my own personal gripe. I
think that makes some sense. And if we do move towards giving design review board more muscle, we might also want to consider, if they're only dealing with businesses, who we have on that board. So what I want to do really quickly in our last little bit is read who's on the design review board. And I'm curious, Ria, if you would be comfortable saying we ought to add this type of requirement, like somebody in commercial real estate, say, or do we have too much of something else? Does that make sense, Ria?
I do believe.
Or are you not comfortable with that?
Well, no, I think that it's just hard to find people in our town with that kind of background. I mean, there's a couple of us, sure, but I was thinking of, because it's all a learning process, Ted. None of us started, with this, bucket of knowledge of how to do volunteer work for the town. We weren't born this way. We had to learn it somehow, way, right?
Amen.
So what I was going to say is that what I think might be a really good idea is, if the design review board is doing a big project, that maybe one of those members is actually, at the planning board hearing that reviews that project. So that actually gets transmitted more clearly than just a piece of paper that you got to read another thing. You know what I mean? Like, it's much more
So
powerful.
it's less the requirements and more stronger communication.
Yes.
Is you really are advising.
Yeah, I think so.
Besides maybe changing some language that might do some stuff too.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
you are restricted as to what you can actually do with this design review board by the state laws. So there's that you have to consider. But it's like, I believe the project that Mary Larson was talking about, not only was I on the design review board, but I was on the Board of Appeals, and I was having to chair the night that the thing came down. And it was horrible, because I was like, wait a second, this isn't what we wanted. But I had no teeth because of my role in the Board of Appeals that night. It was really a mess. And it was unfortunate, but I think it turned out okay in the end, believe it or not. So,
well, that's good.
Well,
In
yeah,
that
because
case.
we were all very concerned about it. But, like I said, the Board of Appeals has a purview that's different from the design review board and the planning board.
Right.
It is all about a law. that is actually, it's black and white pretty much. And do you want to go outside that black and white? Is there a overwhelming reason to do that? That's what the Board of Appeals is all about. But anyway,
Okay.
hopefully I
All right.
answered the question.
No, I think you've been very helpful. And like I said, whether you're a member of the public or you want to
Nick,
coming back when the term ends, either way, I would love to, certainly with this issue,
sounds good. Ted,
you
you know where to
online
get,
if you're interested.
you have my number, I think. You still have it, I believe.
I
So,
think I do.
you know, let me know.
Okay, and then John, I think I'm gonna try to find time to swing by town hall between now and our next meeting, and maybe you can help me a little bit more with some of the nitty gritty that you covered, because that was a kind of a fire hose of information that I certainly wasn't able to take in.
Sure.
Um,
And through the chair,
go
just want to
ahead.
mention also, when you're looking at the bylaws, just remember that there can be a small section in the zoning that says for example, the design review board has the authority to issue sign permits based on regulations and guidelines that they adopt. And that could be it, right? And then the separate documents that we would use that would really enumerate all of the requirements and the guidelines and stuff could be outside of zoning. So we don't have to think about how do we squish this whole thing into zoning. We can try and do it in two pieces.
Okay, all right. We are up against the Catino rule, which is we must end by 9 o'clock. And I like that rule. So may I get a motion to adjourn
So move.
and a second?
Second.
Great. Where is here it is. Here we go. Mary Larson Marlowe,
Yes.
Ron,
Yes.
Arnold,
Yes.
Sam,
Yes.
and Vic.
Yes.
And I will go ahead and make it unanimous. 8:55 feels like a good time to break off. Until, what did we say? May 13th, was it?
Mm-hmm.
I hope everyone does well and maybe does a little bit of zoning homework before we get to that meeting. Okey doke.
Happy
All right,
marathon
Nice
weekend.
to see you guys.
Happy marathon, everybody. Yes.
All right, nice seeing you, Rhea.
Thank you, Mary.